There are 10,000 ways to die in the 41st millennium, and most of them are quick, brutal, and forgotten. But the path to becoming one of the Emperor's angels of death is not quick, nor is it merciful. It is a slow crucible of flesh, bone, and soul, a transformation that begins in fear and ends, if one is strong enough, in fire. I was born on a hive world, one of the countless warrens of steel and smog where a human life is worth less than the spent charge pack of a lasgun. I never expected anything greater than the gangs, the hunger, the endless fight for survival. But fate, or perhaps the hand of the Emperor himself, saw me taken. The chapter had come. Their black-armored chaplains and towering warriors descended, and from among the thousands, a mere handful were chosen. I was one of them. They told us little, only that we had been found worthy of the trials. That word carried weight, heavier than any chain I had ever felt. And so, under the watch of the apothecaries and the stern glares of the scout sergeants, our journey began. At first, it was simple brutality. We were run until our lungs burned, beaten until our bodies failed, then commanded to rise again. Food was rationed, water withheld. The weak fell quickly, some collapsed in training, others vanished overnight, never to be seen again. We whispered about their fate in the barracks, until the whispers faded and silence became our only refuge. The apothecaries began their work soon after. They called us aspirants, vessels to be broken and rebuilt. The first procedures were crude to my mind, though to them they were routine. Gene seed organs implanted, muscles torn and reforged, bones hardened with ceramite grafts. I remember the agony most of all. My veins burned like fire, my skull split with pressure as the black carapace was fused into me. More than once I prayed for death, but prayers in the Imperium are answered only with silence. And yet, in that silence, I began to change. I could see further, hear more keenly, feel the weight of my own strength increasing with each day. Tasks that once seemed impossible, carrying loads heavier than men, running for hours in choking storms, firing a bolter without flinching from its roar, became my new reality. Competence was the only path to survival. And survival, the only path to glory. I remember the first time Sergeant Varian tested us. He was a grizzled veteran, his scalp scarred and his right eye replaced with a gleaming augmetic lens. Without warning, he ordered us into the training pits where servitors unleashed live-fire drills. Heavy stubber rounds ripped across the sand, last bolts flared in the gloom. One aspirant froze, and in that moment, Varian struck him down himself. "Fear is poison," he growled, his voice as rough as ceramite plates grinding together. "And the poisoned do not become Astartes." It was in that moment that I understood. To be chosen was no gift. It was a sentence, a trial by fire that demanded the death of the boy I had been. At night, in the silence of the dormitories, I would feel the others shifting restlessly. Some muttered litanies they'd learned from the chaplains, clinging to the Emperor's light. Others simply stared into the dark, hollow-eyed, as if already half dead. I wondered which I would become. Still, there were moments, brief, fleeting, where pride cut through the pain. When I hit a moving target at 200 paces with a bolter. When I scaled the walls of the fortress without a harness, my new muscles straining but never failing. When I caught the faintest whisper of a servitor's motor before it revealed itself in ambush. In those moments, I felt closer to the warriors who had plucked me from the hive. Closer to the angels I might one day stand beside. But the road was long. The first surgeries were only the beginning. There were 19 implants to endure, each more invasive than the last. The chapter apothecaries warned us, not all would survive. And even if we did, there was still the gauntlet of trials, the tests of faith and steel, before one could be granted even the armor of a neophyte. I knew fear. I swallowed it daily. Yet within me grew something else, something sharper than fear, the hunger to prove myself. To rise above the dirt and ash I was born into. To stand as more than a boy from the hive. And so, the trials began. The surgeries continued, each one dragging me further from humanity and closer to something else. Something greater, something monstrous. The apothecaries called it ascension. To us aspirants, it felt like death delivered piece by piece. I remember the table, the smell of sterilized steel, the cold hum of cogitators keeping my heart alive while they cut into me. The pain was beyond endurance, but endurance was demanded. No anesthetic, no mercy. Pain is the Emperor's truth, one apothecary said as he drove the hypodermic injector into my chest, implanting the Laraman's organ. Learn it, or die. I lived. The lineman's ear followed. My senses sharpened until the scrape of boots across stone echoed like thunder in my skull. A new lung, allowing me to breathe the ash and toxins of dead worlds without faltering. As modular treatment stretched and reinforced my bones, leaving me taller, broader, alien even to my own reflection. I began to look like the angels who had taken me from the hive. Almost. Some aspirants broke under the strain. One choked on his own blood during the implant of the omophagia, the organ that would allow us to draw memory from the flesh of the slain. Another's mind simply unraveled after weeks of pain. He tried to flee, bolting across the training yard. He didn't make it 3 paces before Sergeant Varian put a bolt round through his skull. Fear was a chain, and those who carried it were cast aside. Our training evolved alongside our bodies. No longer were we merely run into the ground. Now we hunted, ambushed, and learned to strike unseen. We were given camo cloaks, their fibers shifting against the light, and the bolt gun scaled down for our still developing forms, the bolt carbine, brutal and efficient. I learned to disassemble mine blindfolded, fingers moving on instinct, each click of the mechanism a prayer of competence. Varian demanded perfection. He drilled us in marksmanship until our shoulders bruised from recoil, in silent movement until even our shadows seemed hesitant to follow. When one aspirant failed to hit center mass on a target, Varian made him fire until the weapon's recoil dislocated his arm. Only when he reset the bone himself, sweat running down his face but voice steady, did the sergeant nod in approval. At night, I felt my body thrum with unnatural power. Muscles coiled like steel, reflexes snapping into place faster than thought. The boy who had scurried through hive alleys was gone. In his place was something harder, forged by agony and discipline. And yet, I feared what I was becoming. Not just stronger, but stranger. The omophagia spoke first. After training hunt, I tasted the raw flesh of a slain beast, and in that moment I saw its memories, its last kill, the scent of blood, the fear it felt before my blade struck. It was intoxicating, horrifying. Use it, Varian said, when I confessed my unease. His augmetic I word, unblinking. Every gift of the gene seed is a weapon. Weapons are not feared, aspirant. They are wielded. I clung to his words. They gave me a frame, a purpose. The final trial of that season came without warning. We were herded into a dark cavern beneath the fortress, our only tools knives and our camo cloaks. Varian's voice came through the vox, survive until dawn. Then the gates opened, and feral servitors, their flesh rotting, their limbs replaced with chains and rusted blades, shambled into the dark. We moved as one. Silent, patient, every sense sharpened, every movement deliberate. The boy I had been would have panicked, rushed, screamed. But the scout I was becoming stalked and struck with precision. I slit one servitor's throat from the shadows, drove my blade into another spine, dodged a flailing chain by inches. When dawn finally rose through the slats of the ceiling, 6 of us remained standing. From dozens, 6. We had been broken down, carved apart, reforged in steel and fire. And yet, I knew the worst was still ahead. Because we were not yet scouts. Not yet angels. Only tools being sharpened for the wars to come. Into the shadows, that was where our real education began. We had endured the surgeries, the pain, the deaths of so many brothers who had faltered. But survival was not enough. To serve as a scout meant to master the unseen war, the war fought in silence, patience, and hidden blades. Sergeant Varian told us plainly, an Astartes scout is not yet a space marine. You are the knife in the dark, the unseen hand. You pave the way for your brothers in ceramite. His augmetic eye scanned us, hard and unyielding. If you cannot strike unseen, you will not live long enough to earn your armor. We were issued our camo cloaks in full, the fibers woven with shifting pigments that blurred against rock, soil, or steel. Wrapped in them, I felt less like a man and more like a shadow. The bolt carbines hung heavy across our backs, brutal but versatile. Knives, Auspex scanners, and silenced pistols completed our kit. I remember the first time I laid out my gear in perfect order, each piece cleaned, oiled, ready. The sight filled me with a pride sharper than hunger. Our training grounds shifted from sterile fortress yards to wild, feral landscapes. We were dropped into the wastes surrounding the chapter's fortress monastery, crags of black stone, valleys choked in mist, forests that stank of mold and predators. There, under Varian's watch, we learned the art of survival. Silence was everything. The crunch of a boot on gravel could betray a squad. One aspirant, too loud in his step, was killed by a training servitor with a single bolt round. Varian barked no orders, gave no sympathy. Only a lesson. Your life, your squad's life, your chapter's victory, all forfeit if you cannot walk unseen. Patience followed. We lay for hours in the cold mud, our cloaks damp and heavy, eyes locked through scopes on distant targets. Not firing, not moving, only waiting. The first day, I twitched from hunger. The second, I ignored the ache. By the third, I was still a stone. When at last Varian whispered through the vox, "Engage," I squeezed the trigger. My round hit dead center, alongside my brother's. The synchronized strike left 6 targets shattered in an instant. Discipline made us more than individuals. In the hive, survival had meant looking to myself, trusting no one. Here, that instinct was poison. A scout alone was nothing. A squad moved like a single mind. We advanced in perfect lines, covered each other's flanks, left no sound but the whisper of breath through vox beads. Varian tested this mercilessly. Surprise ambushes, false orders, even starvation. He tried to break our cohesion, and in that breaking teach us unity. But not all lessons came from drills. Some came from fear. One night, during a reconnaissance exercise, the Auspex detected movement far beyond our perimeter. We thought it a test, another servitor attack. But the shapes we glimpsed through the trees were not servitors. They were beasts, half-feral predators that roamed the monastery's wastes, jaws like bone saws, claws like steel. Varian's voice crackled through the vox. Real enemies do not wait for you to be ready. We fought them as we had been taught. Silent blades, swift bolts, discipline holding us together. I remember the blood spraying across my camo cloak, hot against the cold night air, as I rammed my knife into a beast's throat. My brother Jorel took one across the arm. He didn't cry out, only tightened his grip and drove his blade home. When the last beast fell, Varian emerged from the shadows. He said nothing, only gave us the faintest nod. For him, that nod was worth a litany. After that night, I felt something change within me. Not just in my body, but in my soul. I was no longer the boy plucked from the hive. I was part of something greater. I was learning what it meant to be a scout of the Adeptus Astartes. Still, doubt lingered. We had learned to stalk, to strike, to wait. But these were only the shadows before the storm. Whispers spread among us. Soon, we would face our first true enemy. Not servitors, not beasts, not drills. Real war. Real blood. And in the 41st millennium, war is eternal. First blooding. The phrase was spoken with reverence, but also with dread. Every aspirant knew it was coming, the trial by combat that would decide whether we lived as neophytes or died as failures. Sergeant Varian gave no speech, offered no blessing. He simply told us to ready our gear. That silence was heavier than any words. The dropship stank of promethium and steel as it carried us into the void. I sat strapped into the crash webbing, fingers tightening around the grip of my bolt carbine. Around me, the other aspirants sat in the dim red glow, their faces half-shadowed beneath camo hoods. None spoke. Even Jorel, who was never without some muttered prayer, kept his lips sealed. The rumble of the engines filled the silence. Varian stood at the front, one hand gripping the overhead rail, the other resting casually on his chain's word. His augmetic eye glared at us, unblinking. "Your prey are orcs," he said flatly. "Feral. Stupid. Brutal. They infest this frontier world like maggots. You will kill them, or they will kill you. Either way, you will learn." The ramp lowered with a hiss of hydraulics, and the stench of the planet hit us. Blood, smoke, and rot. We stepped into a forest of twisted trees, their bark blackened by fire. In the distance, we heard the guttural roars of the greenskins. The Auspex flickered in my hand, its green runes scanning the tree line. Movement pinged at the edge of range. A patrol, 4 orcs, crude axes in hand, their guttural laughter echoing through the mist. Varian's voice whispered across the vox, "Eliminate." We moved as one. Shadows among shadows, our cloaks merging with the terrain. I steadied my breathing, raised the carbine, and sighted down the scope. My target lumbered forward, tusked mouth open in a snarl. At Varian's signal, we fired. 4 bolts cracked like thunder. 4 orcs staggered, flesh and bone shredded by explosive shells. One still moved, bellowing in rage as it dragged itself forward, axe raised high. Jorel stepped from cover, drove his blade into the orc's throat, and twisted until the beast fell silent. My heart thundered. The hive alleys had taught me violence, but never like this. The orcs were larger than men, stronger, tougher, and yet, we had ended them in a single coordinated strike. For the first time, I felt the true weight of the Emperor's hand upon me. But there was no time to bask in triumph. The forest erupted with answering roars. More orcs. Dozens. Their war cries shook the air. We melted back into cover, Varian's orders sharp and controlled. Fall back. Draw them out. Bleed them dry. What followed was a blur of shadow and fire. We struck from concealment, each bolt tearing through green flesh. We vanished before the enemy could strike back, moving like ghosts. The orcs grew angrier, their charges wild, their axes biting only air and tree bark. One by one, we cut them down. But they were many, and we were few. At one point, an orc broke through our perimeter, charging straight at me. Its axe whistled through the air, close enough that I felt the wind of its swing. Instinct, not thought, guided me. I rolled beneath the strike, came up inside its guard, and jammed my carbine into its gut. The bolt detonated, showering me in gore. I staggered back, choking on the stench, but alive. The fight raged until night fell. By dawn, the forest floor was littered with corpses. Varian called a retreat, and we regrouped at the extraction point, our cloaks torn, our ammo nearly spent. He surveyed us in silence. Then, finally, he spoke. "You are blooded." His chain's word rested on his shoulder, its teeth glistening with orc ichor. But do not mistake this for victory. This was nothing. A skirmish. You have seen only the smallest taste of what awaits you in this galaxy. As the dropship lifted us back into the void, I stared at the blood drying on my hands. The boy I had been was gone. In his place stood something harder. Something colder. For the first time, I dared to believe I might one day earn the right to call myself a space marine. The Emperor's gaze. That was how Jorel described it, in the quiet hours when we lay beneath the weight of our cloaks, waiting for dawn. He whispered that the Emperor was always watching, his light piercing even the deepest shadows. But in those same shadows, I sometimes felt another presence, not light, but something colder, hungrier. After the blooding, our squad was changed. We carried ourselves with more confidence, spoke less like boys and more like soldiers. Yet beneath that iron shell, doubts gnawed. Not of our skills, we had proven those, but of the silence that followed. The silence between battles is never empty in the Imperium. It is filled with thoughts, memories, and whispers. During night vigils, Sergeant Varian would have us sit alone across the training grounds. No sound but the wind, no light but the stars. A scout must be comfortable in solitude, he said. In silence, you will hear the enemy. In silence, you will hear yourselves. But silence is never truly silent. At first, I heard only the forest, the rustle of leaves, the creak of old branches. But then came the whispers. A faint murmur, just beyond hearing, as though voices lingered at the edge of the wind. At times I thought I heard my mother's voice from the hive, calling me by a name I no longer bore. Other nights, it was harsher, urging me to surrender, to lay down the burden of the trials. I never told the others, though I saw the same unease in their eyes. Even Jorel, steadfast in his faith, prayed louder each night, as though drowning out something only he could hear. Varian noticed, of course. He always noticed. "Doubt is the shadow that kills," he said one morning, his gaze sweeping over us like a blade. "You will feel fear. You will feel weakness. A true scout learns to wear those feelings like armor, to let them sharpen his edge. But if you allow them to master you," he drew his chain's word, revved it once, then let the silence finish the lesson. Our training intensified. We drilled infiltration runs until exhaustion blurred the edges of my vision. We stalked across canyons in darkness, our cloaks blending with stone, while Auspex drones hunted us from above. Failure meant live rounds snapping at our heels. I was grazed once, a burning line across my thigh, but I pressed on, gritting my teeth until the mission was complete. Pain was proof of survival. And yet, the whispers remained. During one exercise, we were tasked with a silent kill against a heretic servitor deep in the wastes. I crept close, blade ready, when I felt the air grow heavy, a wrongness, as if the world itself held its breath. My vision blurred, and for a heartbeat I saw something coiled around the servitor, a shadow with too many eyes. I blinked, and it was gone. The servitor still stood there, oblivious, waiting to be ended. I slit its throat and returned to the squad, saying nothing. But that night, as I lay beneath the stars, the whispers grew louder. Jorel confronted me then. "You hear it too," he said, voice low, eyes hollow. He spoke of a weight pressing on his soul, a darkness watching from beyond the void. "The chaplains say faith will shield us," he whispered. "But what if faith isn't enough?" I had no answer. Only silence. Still, we endured. The Emperor demanded endurance. Each day we grew deadlier, each night harder. And though the shadows pressed closer, though the whispers gnawed deeper, I clung to the only truth I had left. To falter was death, and death without service was failure. Better to die a scout in the Emperor's gaze than live as nothing in the dark. Silent blades, steady bolts. That was the creed hammered into us as we prepared for our first true mission against living, breathing heretics. No more beasts, no more feral orcs. This time, our prey were men, corrupted, but still human once. The thought unsettled me more than I expected. It is easy to kill monsters. Harder, when their faces could have been your own. We were deployed to a mining outpost on the edge of the sector, its Vox traffic cut, its tithes overdue. Imperial records reported unrest, whispers of rebellion. By the time the chapter's fleet received word, the outpost was already lost. Our task was not to reclaim it, not yet. It was to bleed it, to silence its leaders, to choke its voice, to sow fear until the full weight of the chapter could fall. The Thunderhawk dropped us miles from the target, skimming low over barren rock. We moved under cover of night, cloaks blending with the jagged stone. Auspex sweeps revealed sentries on the perimeter, armed with las rifles and makeshift autoguns. They looked poorly trained, poorly disciplined, but numbers make fools dangerous. Varian's orders came sharp and clear over the Vox: eliminate sentries. Leave no trace. Then infiltrate. I belly crawled through the dirt, carbine strapped tight to my back, blade drawn in silence. The sentry ahead was barely more than a boy, his uniform tattered, eyes scanning without focus. When my hand clamped over his mouth, he stiffened. When my blade slid into his throat, he died with barely a twitch. The warmth of his blood seeped across my gloves, but I held him still until his struggles ceased. Silent blades, I whispered to myself, echoing the creed. The others worked just as efficiently. Jorel snapped a neck with cold precision. 2 more fell to suppress bolts, their bodies dragged into shadow. Within minutes, the perimeter was ours. Inside the compound, the heretics had gathered. Makeshift banners scrawled with blasphemies hung across walls of rusted steel. They sang their defiance to the Emperor, voices ragged but loud, their fire fueled by belief. In the flickering light of burning braziers, I saw them for what they were: men who had chosen rebellion over faith. Men who would never again be reclaimed. We struck like phantoms. Bolts punched through heretic skulls, knives slit throats in the dark, cloaks shimmered as we vanished between shadows. Panic erupted among them, their chants breaking into screams. They fired wildly, their last shots cutting only air. Each muzzle flash was a beacon, and each beacon was answered by death. But it was not without cost. One of my squad, Taran, took a round to the shoulder. He didn't fall, didn't cry out, only gritted his teeth and pressed on, his carbine steady as ever. Varian hauled him into cover with a single hand, muttering, "Endurance proves worth." Taran nodded, blood soaking his cloak, but his eyes burned with defiance. By dawn, the outpost lay silent. Dozens of heretics dead, their leaders among them. We had crippled the rebellion's spine before the chapter even arrived. Varian gathered us at the compound's edge, his chains were dripping blood. "You have killed men," he said, voice low, mechanical eye whirring across our faces. "Remember this. You are no longer human, but your prey often will be. Do not pity them. Do not hesitate. Their souls are already damned. Your duty is only to deliver judgment." The words settled heavy in my chest. The boy from the hive still lived somewhere deep inside me, whispering doubts. But the scout I had become, the warrior I was becoming, smothered those whispers with cold steel. Silent blades. Steady bolts. Judgment without hesitation. That was the path of an angel in the making. When the Vox goes dead, silence becomes a weapon of its own. And silence, in the 41st millennium, is never natural. Our next mission was to strike deeper into the mining settlement, dismantling what remained of the heretics' command structure. The night was heavy with ash, the stars hidden behind smoke plumes that clawed the sky. We advanced in disciplined lines, Auspex scanning, Vox links alive with terse murmurs of position and confirmation. The world felt contained, controlled, until it didn't. One moment, Varian's voice was steady in my ear. Advance, left flank, 30 meters. Keep low. The next, nothing. A snap of static, then dead silence. I froze, instinct tightening my grip on the carbine. Across the squad, heads turned, eyes searching. We had trained for this, drilled again and again. When Vox dies, discipline survives. And so, wordlessly, we shifted into fallback formation, every movement precise. The Auspex in my hand flickered. Contacts appeared, then vanished, dancing across the screen as if mocked by some unseen hand. I tapped the display, adjusted calibration, but the readings remained erratic. Jorel caught my eye, his expression grim beneath his hood. Interference, he mouthed. I nodded, though inside my chest the old doubts clawed again. We pressed on, moving by hand signals alone. The compound loomed ahead, rusted silos, broken conveyors, the bones of industry left to rot. Fires still smoldered in the distance, but no sentries patrolled, no shouts rang out. It was too quiet. I felt it first as a weight. The air thickened, pressing on my chest, each breath harder than the last. The Auspex went dead, its runes flickering to black. Shadows deepened unnaturally, stretching long fingers across steel walls. And then came the sound, not a shout, not a scream, but a low murmur. Familiar. Terrifying. The same whispers I had heard in the night vigils, crawling at the edges of thought. One of the aspirants, Carrick, clutched his head. Voices, he hissed, teeth bared. They're in me. Varian struck him with the flat of his blade, dropping him to the ground. Silence, the sergeant barked, his voice carrying more command than fear. His augmetic eye swept the shadows, unblinking. This is no interference. This is corruption. Then the attack came. Not from ahead, but all around. Heretics spilled from the ruins, their eyes wild, mouths foaming with half-screamed litanies to powers unspoken. They fought with savage abandon, swinging crude weapons, firing lasguns without thought of survival. It was not the rebellion of men, it was the frenzy of those touched by something darker. We answered with precision. Bolt carbines cracked, each round punching bodies apart. Knives flashed as we cut through their ranks, every movement drilled, efficient. For every heretic that fell, 2 more lunged from the shadows. The air was thick with smoke, blood, and something colder, a pressure that pressed against my skull like claws. Amid the chaos, Varian rallied us. His chains word roared, its teeth chewing flesh and steel alike. Hold formation. Do not break. His voice cut through the madness, an anchor in the tide. We moved as one, falling back toward higher ground, every step measured, every bolt fired with purpose. But I could not ignore it, the whispers, louder now, twisting into words. They called my name. Not the name given by the chapter, but the one from the hive, the one I had buried with my old life. I clenched my teeth, fired until my carbine's mag clicked empty, and jammed another in with shaking hands. When at last the last heretic fell, gurgling his blasphemies through torn lungs, we stood panting amid the corpses. Carrick lay unconscious, dragged behind cover by Jorel. Varian's augmetic eye glowed red in the dark. This was no rabble, he growled. Something moves among them. Something worse than men. The silence that followed was heavier than any gunfire. The Vox remained dead. The Auspex refused to wake. And in that silence, I still heard the whispers. The shadow of chaos does not always arrive as horns and fire. Sometimes it begins as doubt. Sometimes as whispers. But when it shows itself fully, there is no mistaking it. We regrouped in the ruins of the outpost, the air still thick with smoke and the iron stench of blood. Carrick stirred weakly under Jorel's watch, his face pale, sweat running down his brow. His eyes flickered open, but they were wrong, pupils dilated, unfocused, as if seeing something that was not there. I hear them, he whispered, his voice cracking. They call for us, they promise, release. Varian stood over him, silent. For a moment, I thought the sergeant might strike him down then and there. Instead, he ordered 2 of us to bind him and drag him along. Until he falls fully, Varian said coldly, he still serves. The unspoken truth was clear. If Carrick turned, his life would end by our blades, not the enemies. We advanced deeper into the mining compound. The silence pressed heavier with every step. Machinery loomed around us, conveyors long since rusted, drills broken and bent like the bones of giants. The walls were daubed in symbols scrawled in ash and blood, jagged spirals and runes that seemed to crawl when stared at too long. My eyes burned from looking, but I could not look away. Then came the chanting. Low, rhythmic, rising and falling like the breath of the dead. It seeped from the broken silos, a sound too many throats to be human alone. Varian raised his fist, signaling halt, then pointed us into positions along the high gantries. From above, I saw them, a congregation of heretics gathered around a pit, their bodies swaying, their mouths open in one terrible unison. At the pit's edge stood a figure robed in tattered crimson, staff raised high, its head crowned with horns of metal twisted like bone. The chanting rolled from him like a storm, and I felt it hammer against my skull. Jorel clenched his jaw, muttering litanies to the Emperor beneath his breath. My own hands trembled, though not from fear of death. This was something worse. The air was wrong, heavy with the warp, as if reality itself frayed thin around that pit. Target the leader, Varian ordered. His voice was iron, steady as stone. On my mark. We leveled our carbines, scopes fixed on the robed figure. My finger hovered on the trigger, sweat beading beneath my gloves. But before Varian could give the signal, the figure turned its head, and I swore it looked straight at me. The chanting broke into a scream. The ground shook as a pulse of force erupted from the pit, a shockwave that slammed into us like a hammer. My teeth rattled, my vision blurred, and for a heartbeat, I saw shapes rising from the darkness below. Not men. Not orcs. Things with too many limbs, too many mouths, forms shifting like smoke in a storm. Chaos had come. Varian roared through the vox, which sputtered alive with static, fire. Bolts thundered, cutting through chanting throats, tearing into robed flesh. The figure at the pit staggered but did not fall, the staff raised higher, its tip blazing with sickly light. Around us, heretics screamed in ecstasy, their bodies convulsing, twisting into new, unnatural forms. Hands split into claws, faces tore into fanged maws. The warp was remaking them even as we fired. Withdraw. Contain them. Varian's chains word roared to life, its teeth hungry. The enemy is not men alone, it is the darkness that feeds on them. We fell back into the gantries, firing as we moved, every round exploding in gore and shadow. My heart pounded not with fear of dying, but with fear of becoming. The whispers were louder now, promising strength, power, survival, if only I would surrender. I clamped my teeth shut, muttered the Emperor's name like a shield, and fired again. For the first time, I understood. We were not scouts hunting rebels. We were children staring into the abyss of the galaxy's true enemy. And the abyss was staring back. The shrine floor had become a charnel house. Smoke curled from broken lasguns, mingling with the acrid stink of ichor. My blade dripped, each drop hissing on the ash-coated stone. The silence that followed the last wave was not relief, it was dread. Nothing in the galaxy dies that quietly. Jorel knelt beside Carrick, who lay bound and twitching, his chest rising in sharp, unnatural jolts. His pulse is wrong, Jorel murmured. Too fast, too strong. Carrick's eyes snapped open. His lips moved without sound, forming words none of us wanted to hear. His veins pulsed dark beneath his skin, spreading like ink. Stand ready, Varian ordered. His chains word buzzed to life again, its teeth clattering hungrily. If he turns, you end him. We formed a circle around the shrine. I leveled my carbine at Carrick, though my hands trembled despite my oath. This was no enemy across the battlefield. This was one of us. One who had trained beside me, suffered beside me. One who had dreamed of the black carapace, of earning the honor of the gene seed. Carrick laughed. A wet, broken laugh, nothing like his voice. You don't understand. They've already claimed me. His body arched, every muscle straining. The bindings snapped like thread. Flesh split. Bone cracked. His mouth tore wider, teeth lengthening into jagged shards. A second voice, not his, poured from his throat, a chorus that scraped the edges of my mind. Then he lunged. I fired first, my bolt round catching him in the chest. The blast tore through, but he did not fall. Jorel swung his combat blade, cutting deep into Carrick's side. Still he came, stronger, faster, his claws raking sparks off Varian's pauldron. Varian's chainsword screamed. With a single, brutal strike, he split Carrick from shoulder to hip. The body fell twitching, still whispering, even as the life drained out of it. No one moved. No one spoke. We only listened, to the whispers that did not fade with his death. "Burn him," Varian commanded at last. We piled debris, lit it with promethium, and watched Carrick's remains crackle in the fire. The flames roared high, sparks carried into the storm, a false star in a galaxy where true light was dying. As the body burned, the whispers grew louder. They weren't coming from him anymore. They were coming from the pit, from the storm, from the very air. The corruption did not end with Carrick's death. It only spread wider. Varian turned to us, his augmetic eye burning red through the smoke. "This world is lost. But we are not." His words steadied me, though fear still coiled tight in my gut. The enemy could corrupt, could twist, could turn brother against brother. But as long as Varian stood, blade in hand, faith unbroken, I could believe, even for a heartbeat, that we might endure. Still, as the fire consumed what was once Carrick, I could not shake the truth that gnawed at me. We were not purging this world. We were delaying the inevitable. And inevitability had many claws. The fire still crackled when the storm shifted. The ash blew sideways, carrying with it a sound I knew too well: drums. Not mechanical, not Arbite's discipline, but the primitive pounding of flesh on hide. War drums. The heretics were gathering again. Varian raised his hand. No words, no orders. We knew. Reload. Reset formation. Prepare to meet death with steel. I slid my last mag into the carbine. The click echoed in my skull like a death knell. I had counted every round in every fight since my induction, and I knew this would not be enough. Beside me, Jorel wiped blood from his blade with ritual care, his lips murmuring litanies through clenched teeth. Even fear became prayer in his mouth. The drums grew louder, closer. Then came the torches, dozens of them, swaying through the storm like burning eyes. Figures marched in ragged formation, chanting with every step. Some still wore remnants of mining uniforms, Arbite's armor, even tattered ecclesiarchy robes, but all were defiled with bloody sigils, their faces carved into masks of devotion to the warp. At their center, the horned figure stood again, the one who had looked at me in the pit. His staff blazed with unnatural fire, casting his shadow long across the ruins. He raised it high, and the drums stopped in an instant. Silence fell, heavy, absolute. Then he spoke. Not with his mouth, but with every stone, every breath of ash, every drop of blood in my veins. "You are children of false gods. Come. Take your place at the altar of truth." Varian's voice cut through like a blade. "Scouts of the Emperor do not kneel." The first wave charged. They came not with caution but with frenzy, screaming praises to the dark. Last fire lit the storm, torchlight blurred with muzzle flash. We answered in kind. Carbines cracked, bolts tearing through heretic ranks, flames devouring their broken bodies. The shrine became a fortress once more, every wall spitting death. I killed without thought. A heretic skull burst under my round. Another fell clutching a cauterized wound where his heart should have been. Still, they pressed on, trampling their own dead, climbing over corpses just to reach us. One broke through, his body swollen with tumors that pulsed with light. He swung a crude hammer, shattering stone inches from my head. I drove my blade up through his throat, twisting until the light in his eyes gutted out. His blood steamed on the shrine floor, black as oil. The air shook as the horned figure struck his staff into the ground. A wave of force slammed against us, knocking me to my knees. My carbine skidded across the stone, lost in the dust. When I looked up, the staff blazed brighter, its light revealing forms moving in the storm. Not men, not heretics, but things half-born, half-formed, tearing their way through reality. Warp spawn. Jorel shouted over the din, voice raw. "They're summoning them. Close the circle." Varian didn't hesitate. He leapt from the shrine wall into the tide, chainsword screaming, carving a path straight toward the staff-bearer. His fury was unmatched, every strike tearing flesh and metal alike. For a moment, he was unstoppable, the very image of what we all aspired to become. But even as he cut them down, more poured in. The heretics did not break. The storm itself seemed to howl in their favor. And beyond the blaze of the staff, I could feel eyes, vast, hungering, eternal, watching. We fought like wolves cornered by fire, every breath a prayer, every strike a denial of corruption. Still, I knew the truth. We were holding, not winning. The shrine stones cracked beneath our boots. The dead piled higher. And the warp spawn were not stopping. This was no battle. This was a sacrifice. And I feared we were the offering. The line shattered. Not in spirit, in stone. The shrine wall buckled as something massive slammed into it from outside. Masonry collapsed, the Emperor's defiled statue breaking apart in a thunderclap of rubble. Through the breach came not men, but horrors. They were not heretics anymore. The warp had remade them. One crawled on all fours, its spine split into barbs, its head a mass of eyes blinking in unison. Another walked upright, its chest splitting open to reveal a lamprey more that screamed with 10 voices at once. Their presence was a weight on reality itself. We fell back to the altar steps, forming a ragged semicircle. My carbine was gone, my blade dulled and chipped, but my hands did not falter. The oath bound into my blood was louder than the whispers clawing at my skull. Varian fought like a god of war. His chain's word roared through flesh and stone, each strike severing limbs, spilling corruption across the shrine floor. He moved with the certainty of decades of discipline, his augmetic eye glowing like a furnace. For every monster that lunged, he met them head-on, unflinching. He was more than human. He was what I longed to be. But even gods bleed. One of the warp spawn struck him, its claw punching through his pauldron. He staggered, bellowing defiance, and tore free by carving the creature in two. Blood sprayed his armor, his movements slower, heavier. Yet his voice never broke. Scouts! Hold the Emperor's ground. Jorel fought beside me, his blade an extension of prayer, every thrust a curse against the enemy. But his breathing was ragged, his face pale beneath the ash. "They're endless," he rasped. "Endless." "No," I growled through clenched teeth. "Not endless. Just enough to test us." Even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. The horned figure advanced through the horde, staff raised, its fire sickly and bright. His mouth moved, but no words left his lips. Instead, the world itself seemed to chant. Symbols carved in blood on the shrine's floor glowed, and from them, the ground split. Something vast stirred beneath. We were too late. The earth convulsed, throwing us to our knees. Cracks split the altar, molten light spilling out like veins of fire. From the chasm rose a claw the size of a man, its surface dripping with molten filth, its nails etched in runes that burned the eyes. Another claw followed, then the beginnings of a face, or something like one, pushing through the veil. A demon. Panic clawed at me, raw and primal. This was no heretic, no mutant, no foe a blade could truly slay. This was a god's shadow made flesh. Even Varian froze for a heartbeat, his augmetic eye flickering. Then he roared. Not in fear. In defiance. No demon takes this world. He charged. We followed. Not because we believed we could win, but because we were his scouts. Because to abandon him was to abandon everything. The oath, the chapter, the Emperor. My blade met flesh that was not flesh, burning as if I had plunged it into molten iron. The demon's scream was thunder, shaking the ruins, rattling my bones. Jorel was hurled back by the force, crashing into rubble, unmoving. I pressed on, teeth bared, vision red with pain and fury. The horned figure raised his staff, and the demon surged higher. The world bent around it, the air thick with warp. The whispers were no longer whispers but shouts, 1,000 voices demanding I kneel, I submit, I worship. For a moment, I faltered. For a moment, I almost obeyed. But then I saw Varian, blooded, battered, his chain's word sparking, still striking, still refusing. His defiance was a wall, and I stood inside it. So I roared too, my voice raw, my blade burying itself again and again into the impossible flesh of the demon. This was no victory. But it was not surrender either. It was defiance. And sometimes, in the 41st millennium, that is all the Emperor asks. The demon filled the shrine like a living storm. Its form was half-born, still clawing its way into reality, but already it dwarfed us. Each movement bent the air, each sound warped my thoughts. The stone beneath us cracked with every breath it drew. We struck at it with everything we had. Bolts exploded against its hide, chains words shrieked through tendons that weren't truly flesh, combat knives plunged into places no anatomy should allow. Each wound closed almost instantly, boiling back into shape as if laughing at our efforts. Varian was at the forefront, his chains word a burning banner of defiance. Every strike of his blade tore pieces from the demon, spraying ichor that hissed and smoked on the altar steps. His augmetic eye blazed, unyielding, even as his body bled. He was no longer just our sergeant. He was the embodiment of everything we aspired to be. Watching him fight was like seeing the Emperor's will made manifest. But even will has limits. The demon swatted him aside with a clawed backhand. He crashed into the broken statue's base, stone splitting on impact. For a heartbeat, I thought he was dead. But then he rose, staggering, chains word coughing sparks. He spat blood, lifted the blade again, and charged once more. "Hold the line," he roared. "If we fall, this world falls with us." The squad obeyed, though exhaustion was etched into every face. Jorel stumbled to my side, his armor cracked, one arm hanging useless. He still gripped his blade with the other, muttering half-litanies between ragged breaths. "We can't stop it," he gasped. "Not with steel. Not with flesh." I knew he was right. Every strike felt like defiance, not damage. We were gnats swarming a storm. The horned figure stood at the edge of the altar, staff raised, feeding the demon's form with every whispered syllable of his chant. I realized then, the staff was the anchor, the ritual's heart. Without it, the demon could not fully breach. "Varian!" I shouted over the cacophony, my voice cracking. "The staff!" His augmetic eye snapped toward it. For a moment, our gazes locked, understanding without words. He bared his teeth in a blooded grin. "Then we break it." We moved as one. Jorel held himself into the horde of heretics shielding their master, his broken body cutting down too before they drag him into the dust. His sacrifice carved us an opening. Varian charged down the altar steps, his chains word roaring, cleaving a path through twisted flesh. I followed close, my blade flashing, every strike a prayer, every breath a denial of despair. The horned figure turned, staff blazing brighter, runes crawling across the stone. He raised his free hand, and the air solidified, slamming against us like a wall. I stumbled, knees buckling, lungs crushed by pressure. Varian did not stumble. He pushed through, roaring like a thunderclap, and slammed into the figure. His chains word bit deep, sparks flying, blood spraying across the altar. The figure shrieked, staff wavering, its glow faltering. I leapt forward, both hands on my blade, and drove it into the staff itself. The wood was not wood, the metal not metal. It screamed as it broke, a sound like tearing reality. Light erupted, blinding, searing through my eyes. The demon shrieked, its form unraveling, claws dissolving into smoke, face collapsing into nothing. The ground shook violently, the shrine splitting apart as the warp closed, dragging its spawn back into the abyss. Silence followed. The figure lay crumpled, its mask shattered, revealing a face that was once human, now stretched beyond recognition. It twitched once, then stilled. The staff was nothing but shards. The demon was gone. I collapsed beside Varian, lungs heaving, blood pounding in my ears. His armor was shredded, his flesh torn, but he still stood, leaning on his chains word like a standard planted in victory. "We are not prey," he growled through bloody teeth. "Not while the Emperor watches." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to hold that moment forever. But even as the ash storm thinned, I knew this was no triumph. It was survival. And in the 41st millennium, survival is always temporary. Dawn broke with no warmth. The ash storm had thinned, revealing a sky the color of iron, streaked with the faint glow of a sun too weak to burn away the shadows. The battlefield lay in ruins, shattered stone, twisted bodies, the stink of ichor seared into the earth. The shrine was no longer a place of faith, but a scar, a wound that would never heal. We stood among the wreckage, fewer than when we had begun. Of the scouts who had followed Varian into the mine, only 4 remained. Jorel's body lay broken at the base of the altar, his blade still clutched in white-knuckled defiance. The others were scattered across the ruins, each corpse a reminder of how thin the line between glory and annihilation truly was. Varian himself was a ruin of flesh and steel. His armor hung in tatters, his augmetic eye flickering, his chains word reduced to a whining husk of broken teeth. And still, he refused to fall. He stood atop the altar steps, staring out across the corpse-littered valley, his voice ragged but unbowed. "This world is not cleansed," he said. The stain will linger. Others will come to finish what we began. But we stood. And the Emperor will know it. His word should have lifted me, should have filled me with pride. But I felt only the weight of exhaustion, of whispers that had not fully died with the demon. The storm carried them still, faint, insidious, like embers beneath ash. They promised power. They promised freedom. They promised survival. And I feared them more than I feared death. We gathered our dead, burning them in pyres beside the shrine. Flames clawed at the sky, smoke rising like prayers that would never be answered. I watched Joral's body crumble into ash, and I whispered his name, not as a brother in arms, but as the boy he once was, before the oaths, before the armor. I wondered who would remember me, if I fell next. Varian limped past the fires, his shadow long in the morning light. He placed a hand on my shoulder, heavy with blood and grime. You saw the demon and did not yield. You broke the staff. You stood when others fell. Remember this. For the chapter will. His words burned into me deeper than any wound. In that moment, I felt both pride and dread. Pride, because I had proven myself. Dread, because proving oneself in the 41st millennium meant only one thing: to be tested again, harder, crueler, until there was nothing left to test. We turned our backs on the shrine at last, marching into the ruins of the settlement. No cheering crowds awaited, no banners raised. Only silence, only ash, only the endless war. We were scouts, initiates still, but we had been tempered in fire. And in the grim darkness of the far future, that is all a soul can hope for, to endure, if only for another day. What is it like to be a Space Marine Scout in the 41st millennium? It is to live with one foot in death and the other in duty, every heartbeat a prayer that the Emperor will grant you another chance to serve. It is to see the galaxy not as a battlefield of glory, but as a graveyard of endless horror, and to step into that graveyard willingly. The tale of the mine and the shrine was not victory. It was survival, nothing more. But survival is its own triumph, when faced with the endless tides of heresy, mutation, and demonic corruption. For the scouts who stood beneath Sergeant Varian, each moment was a crucible. Every breath carried whispers of the warp. Every strike was against an enemy that should not exist. Every death a reminder of how easily brotherhood can unravel. And yet, they stood. They held the line when all reason said to flee. They defied whispers that could have broken worlds. They proved themselves, not by slaying the demon outright, but by refusing to bow before it. That is the essence of being a scout. Not yet armored in the full panoply of a space marine, not yet blessed with all the organs and rights of the chapter. Still human enough to bleed, still weak enough to fear, but already bound to a purpose larger than flesh, larger than fear, larger than life itself. To be a scout is to carry the Emperor's light into places where light should not reach. It is to die unnamed so others may live unknowing. It is to look upon the abyss, to feel it claw back, and to whisper through gritted teeth, "Not today." The Emperor protects. More stories await.